encapsulates who is being innovative, why they're being innovative, because I think creativity drives the industry.
It's not a popularity contest. You know, it's not about who's got like Instagram followers. With fashion, it's such a broad industry. There is a much deeper element to what keeps the industry going, and BOF really looks at that.
It's essential and invaluable source of research for people both inside the industry and outside.
There's so much content to it, and it's so incredibly relevant. I wish I had more time in the day to actually really read each piece, because these are substantial. It's definitely the first thing I read every morning, and it definitely keeps me informed.
I mean, it's different by definition. There's nobody else doing the same. It's a moment where everybody's gathering together.
I'm really interested in not only the creative but also the business end, and everything else that's going around the world in pop culture and world news. So when you put that all together, you've got a lot of info, and it enhances you in many different ways.
Wow, what a room. This is why the business of fashion exists. It is to bring together the most diverse, the most talented, the most influential, and the most exciting group of people working in fashion today.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for being with us tonight. And I'm very happy to see yet another full room, especially after the amazing talk we had from Rito and Scott. And I'm not surprised that again we have a full room, because everybody's as excited as me, I'm sure, to have yet another great personality from the international fashion industry with us here at Fashion Forward. So it's with great pleasure to welcome Imran Amed here in Dubai at Fashion Forward. I think Imran needs little introduction. He is the man behind the business of fashion that first, I think, got a bit of a notorious touch to it when he launched the list of the BOF 500 of the most influential people in the industry globally. 150,000 subscribers receive daily the news feed about fashion at 6 a.m. London time through the email newsletter. 700,000
unique
visitors visit the website every month to get the latest news and in the fashion industry. Vogue UK pinpointedly summed him up as the platform as the fashion for the business-minded and the business for the fashion-minded. A McGill and Harvard Business School graduate, Imran also had a career in consulting with companies like Deloitte and McKinsey. He left it all behind and started a blog on the couch, basically, at home in 2007, and which then eventually led to the site Business of Fashion. Since then, the rapid growth has been an amazing success story in the industry, with injections of capital of several investors in 2013, and has seen several milestones since then. One of the milestones was the introduction of the print issue in 2013. that also launched the Business of Fashion 500 list, which annually brings you the most important people in the fashion industry, the most influential people. Another milestone was in 2014, the Business of Fashion of Careers, which today is considered one of the most sought after and respected platforms for job opportunities in the fashion industry. In 2014, there was also the launch of the Chinese edition. And 2015, the Business of Fashion Education, that today lists a global ranking of the most prestigious and international fashion schools around the globe. 2015 also saw last September another scoop when he hired Tim Blanks as editor-at-large. Since no one knows how to sell his business better than him oneself, I give the mic to Imran now to tell us what prompted him to give up a very promising, lucrative career in consulting and start a blog that led to the Business of Fashion, and the project's initial aim, mission, and what he thought he would achieve with it.
Well, first of all, I just want to thank Fashion Forward for inviting me to come here. Nothing gets me more excited than meeting and interacting excuse me, with our community. And it's been a long time coming for me to visit Dubai. So thank you to all of you for coming tonight. It's a real pleasure to be here. You know, when Susan lists out all of the milestones of the business, it kind of seems like it was this master plan that happened, but actually BOF started as a little experiment on my sofa, and there was no aim when I launched it. There was no specific business objective. There was no real vision, actually. You know, it's really one of these things that started as a project. And you know, after more than a decade of dedicating my professional life to business in management consulting, I thought there might be more for me in my career than what I was finding in my consulting work. And you know, there's nothing worse than working really, really hard every day and kind of ticking off all the boxes that you're supposed to tick off if you're a young overachiever, and then finding that you feel kind of empty. And so I was looking for ways of kind of filling that void. And growing up, I was actually a really, really nerdy academic kid. And I used to study really hard, and I worked to get good grades. But in the evening, I was kind of this crazy creative kid. I was trained in the performing arts. I studied theater, I studied public speaking, I studied voice and musical theater. And I always had, for a very long time, this mixture of kind of left brain analytics and thinking during the day, and right brain creative thinking and creative expression in the evening. So really, you know, after many years as a consultant, what I was looking to do was to integrate those two things together. And you have to realize, like back in 2007, and you know, I see Scott Schumann here in the front row. You know, back in the days when people like Scott and I were starting our blogs, there were no famous bloggers. You know, nobody was really in the fashion industry was, you know, thinking about blogs. You know, the reason you started a blog was just for interest, and really that's, you know, why I started BOF. You know, someone like Scott had a really interesting personal perspective of fashion that he was sharing through imagery, and another friend of ours, Susie Bubble, was exploring her personal perspective of fashion through the outfits she was putting together and the young designers she was meeting. My personal perspective or lens on fashion was really through business, because that's the way I looked at the world. You know, I looked at industries and companies, market forces, technological change, globalization, all of these were the things that I had spent most of my career studying and working on. And so when it came time for me to explore things out of consulting, what I was really doing was just applying my own personal lens to fashion, and it just happened to be business. So, I mean, long story short, Susan, the original objective was really to have a creative outlet and to find a way of exploring this industry that I found, really fascinating.
And what about the challenges you faced?
Well, you have to understand, I mean, for the first 6 years, BOF was literally run from my sofa. It wasn't, I didn't have any big business ambition for it. Mm-hmm. And it was really an organic project, something that was born out of an interest. And almost immediately, and I would, because I am very data-minded, I would almost obsessively check the analytics. And every day I could see it was ticking up a little. And in the first month, I think we had like 150 people, literally. And most of them were my family and friends. And I sent an email to them saying, hey, I started this blog. And they all like read it. And it was a way of kind of sharing my experience. And then it was amazing because we were just at the beginning of the era of social media. This was before Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all of these things changed the way we communicated. But in the first few months, BOF really grew through word of mouth. So people would discover it and they'd share it with their friends. Mm-hmm. Slowly but surely I could see those numbers ticking up. And then all of a sudden I started getting emails. I remember getting an email from Vogue magazine in Korea, and they wanted to ask me something about what I thought about the internet. And then I got an email from the South China Morning Post, and they wanted to ask me about how bloggers were changing the fashion industry. And this was only after 7 or 8 months. So in the first little while, there weren't challenges. It was all very exciting because I was there tapping away on my sofa, and all of a sudden somehow a community of people started to gather around some of the ideas I was exploring. Because at the time, the fashion industry, the world was about to go through a massive shift. We were on the brink of the technological disruption, the digital revolution. Shortly thereafter, there was the financial crisis, and everyone thought the world was going to end. Globalization, the rise of markets like China and India and Brazil. And all of this change required kind of an analyst. And all I'd been trained in my career to do was to analyze and structure and break down problems. And I didn't have all the answers, but I think simply by asking the right questions and talking to people, I began to really understand and develop this whole map of how the fashion industry worked. And soon enough, I started getting invited to attend events like this all over the world. And I would, one of the first trips I took was to Japan, and I recruited our first writer because I met this really smart, undergraduate from Harvard who was fluent in Japanese and was, he loved the fashion industry. And, in a matter of 6 hours, he gave me like the best fashion tour one could hope for in Tokyo. And without him, I would never have learned or explored that part of Tokyo that quickly. And everywhere I went, people were so generous with their time. They were so excited that someone was taking an interest in their region or their market. And with each conversation, with each trip, with each article I wrote, I began to learn. And my job was basically to share those lessons and the things that people were teaching me with everybody else. And it just started to grow. And then when social media started to take off, it was like that word of mouth growth of BOF. It just was turbocharged. So all of a sudden, if I wrote an article that was a provocative idea or that asked an interesting question, people would share it. And soon enough, we had millions and millions of followers on social media. So up until say maybe 4 or 5 or 6 years, it was all like a really wonderful, exciting experience. But soon enough, I had to make a living too, right? Yeah. So I was like, consulting during the day, and I was teaching, and I'd started doing freelance writing, and I had a very, very let's call it rickety infrastructure to manage this thing. There was, after 5 or 6 years, there was like hundreds of thousands of people coming every month, and I was getting requests from all over the world, and there was so much to explore. And it came to a point where that infrastructure that I had in place really wasn't enough to continue the trajectory, to continue the growth, and to continue the journey of BOF. So that's when things became a bit difficult, and it was really challenging because I didn't really know how I was going to continue. I needed to have a way of making a living, but I also desperately wanted to find a way of taking this thing and making it work. And around the same time, investors began to approach me, and I was never really thinking about BOF as a business. I was thinking about it as this project, and the return on investment that I had wasn't in money; it was in the feedback and in the excitement that people had about the topics that we were exploring. So it was about 6 years later that I finally decided that in order to really take this seriously, I needed to stop pretty much everything else and build a team. No longer was it going to be enough for me to try to carry the weight of the expectations of this thing on my own. And in order to build that team, I needed to raise some money. So that's when kind of I think there was a shift for me personally, and I really started thinking about BOF as a media company, a business, and not just my sofa project.
You mentioned before that at the time when you started BOF, that a lot of people looked at fashion as not a serious business. And how do you think that helped you a lot to be able to establish this platform and get investors on board who are starting to see the possibility and the strength of an online platform giving out all that information?
Yeah, I mean, when the investor conversations happened, there was no revenue, right? There was pretty much zero revenue. So I wasn't selling a business based on spreadsheets or financial statements. I was selling and getting investors to buy into a vision, and that vision was that the fashion industry deserved a global platform that explored fashion as a business, that didn't think about fashion in a vacuum, that thought about fashion as a business within a wider geopolitical, technological, economic context. And what they invested in ultimately was the brand. BOF by that point, people use the word brand very loosely, but for me, a brand is something that has emotional resonance. When you think about Coca-Cola, or you think about Nike, or you think about Google, or you think about Apple, there's certain words and feelings that come into your head, right? And BOF had the same kind of resonance with, obviously a much smaller group of people, but the people who followed BOF, the people who engaged with BOF, they really had a strong emotional connection to it. So they kind of invested in the brand, they invested in the vision, and then they invested because we had this community, and over the preceding 6 years, I had traveled, to 30 or 40 countries. I had met with literally thousands and thousands and thousands of young designers, CEOs, media people, academics, the whole cross-section. The BOF 500 really is a product of that. It's a product of all of those relationships and people I've met, and really seeing fashion as a global industry made up of talented people working across a whole bunch of different disciplines. So they bought into this vision that there is a need for a platform to connect this community, and that's really our mission, is to open, to inform, and to connect that community.
With the challenge, of course, one of the challenges I'm sure is competition.
Yeah.
So who would you consider your competitors, and what do you do to stay abreast?
So it's interesting, because if you think about BOF as strictly a media business, then of course there's many other media companies that write about fashion, whether that be Vogue or the New York Times or Women's Wear Daily. So of course those are some of our competitors because we're competing for audience. But BOF isn't just about content, and some of the platforms that you've mentioned, like BOF Careers, BOF education. That means we're also competing with organizations like LinkedIn or recruiters who place, or executive headhunters who place talent in companies. We're competing with the fashion schools, and we're competing with other online education platforms. So as a kind of company, our competitors vary depending on which part of the company you're focusing on.
Being an ex-McKinsey, Deloitte, how do you analyze your growth as a company?
So growth is one of the bywords of the business. Actually, it's something that we talk about a lot in the team. One of our most recent hires is a growth marketing manager, and really our focus is on growing our audience. So we measure growth obviously in terms of engagement with our community and traffic and all of the figures you cited, but also we look at growth and visibility of BOF as a brand. There's things that we can use the internet for to understand how BOF is perceived. There's social media monitoring services, there's Google Insights, and all sorts of things that help us understand how BOF is perceived as a brand and how it's growing. And then also, of course, we look at revenues and how the business is growing from a revenue and from a business standpoint. So we're constantly tracking all those things. We have about a year and a half ago, we hired a chief technology officer, and one of the coolest things that he did for us is he built this dashboard. One of the things that he and I really clicked on, apart from the fact that he was also an avid participant in musical theater in high school. How many CTOs participate in musical theater? I mean, I knew he was perfect when I heard that, but he's also obsessed with data. So he built this dashboard for us, and he and I and many of the people in the company are obsessed with looking at that dashboard. And the dashboard brings together literally every potential metric that you could think of to measure how our business is doing.
So, what are your plans for the future? I mean, you've achieved so much in the past years, and do you have any concrete plans, things for expansion, new platforms?
Well, honestly, it's been an extremely busy year for us, the last 18 months in particular. If you think about it, our company was, on that first day after we closed the round of funding, there was 5 of us in the office. Today we're 30. And that was just under 2.5 years ago. So with a very, very small group of people, we've moved into a lot of different areas. I'd say actually our goals over the next 6 months are more about consolidating and focusing on the platforms that we've launched, as opposed to launching a whole bunch more things. And my team is regularly holding me back, because obviously there's so many things that I want to do, but part of the challenge of running something like BOF is there's no shortage of opportunities, and we really need to focus and be disciplined about focusing and being clear about which opportunities to go after at what point. So in the next few months, I've said to the team, no more new launches. They all breathed a sigh of relief. But really, we're just consolidating, focusing on really expanding the stuff that we've already built in the last while.
Hiring Tim Blanks, what is the aim? Why you think you're going to maybe put more fashion contents as runway coverage?
Well, first of all, I have to say that growing up as a young man in Calgary, in Canada, there's not much fashion there. But every Saturday on the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, there was a television show called Fashion File. And it was my 30-minute window into this incredible industry. And that show was hosted by Tim Blanks. So I grew up watching Tim Blanks on TV. And for him to have agreed to join our team, I mean, for me, it was not only a major milestone for us as a business, but for me personally, it was like one of your childhood heroes. And all of a sudden, I get to review his reviews before they go up, How does that happen? It's an incredible thing. But, to answer the other part of your question, often in the office we're talking about how can we be a media company focused on the fashion industry if we're not talking about the products, if we're not talking about the collections. And we've often had debates in the team that this was something really important that we should do. And I kept saying, guys, like, it's not worth moving into fashion show reviews and fashion imagery because it's commoditized. It's not worth it until you have the right voice. And earlier this summer, when I was talking to Tim about potentially joining BOF, and it became clear that there was a potential to get one of the most important, authoritative, respected voices in the industry to join BOF, then I knew it was the right moment. And obviously, with the changes happening in the media landscape around fashion, with the kind of conversion of style.com into an e-commerce platform, there was really an opportunity for an independent media company to cover fashion shows and Fashion Week, and to be able to be truly critical and opinionated. If there's one thing that we really, really feel is our responsibility and our role at BOF, it is to provide, critical, informed, opinionated analysis about fashion, and that now includes the collections. So we're so happy to have Tim on board, and we've just finished our first season with him, and he and I traveled to all the fashion weeks together, and we were in a car together for most of it, so he and I also got to know each other better personally, and it's, I think it's just the beginning of something really, really great.
There are 16 people from our region that are on your list, BOF 500.
Mm-hmm.
How do you fare the Middle East, or how does it place within the business of fashion for you?
Yeah. Well, clearly 16 out of 500 is actually quite an important number. It reflects very well on the region. The way people often ask, how do you create that list? And why did you create that list? And contrary to popular belief, it wasn't to create controversy. It was really, I just couldn't find, I didn't know of a place that reflected the fashion industry as I saw it. I didn't see anywhere that brought together the whole fashion industry from every part of the world, reflecting the entire cross-section from designers to behind the scenes deal makers to models to academics to the media. We wanted to bring together that whole group. And obviously, it would be remiss of us not to consider this region because not only is it an important region from a retail and consumer standpoint, but there are some big things happening here. And that's largely the reason why I'm here this week is to get a first-hand perspective on the region. Now, I've only been here for 24 hours, so I'm still forming my perspectives, and it's premature for me to provide any real definitive conclusions or insights. But I hope that in the coming days, as I spend more time here, that and as I continue to engage with and meet people here, I'll begin to have a better understanding of what's happening here. But from the very few conversations I've had thus far, it seems like there's a real commitment from the government here, from the various industry bodies that are developing here, from the media here to really position Dubai as a center on the global fashion map. Now, the challenge with that, of course, is that Dubai is not alone in that ambition. I have the same conversations with people when I'm in Shanghai or Bombay or Sao Paulo or Singapore, and wherever you go in the world, there are other global centers that are vying for that attention. And if I'm honest, I think there's a long way to go before we do have other global centers that can compare to the established fashion capitals. I think sometimes, especially in a place like Dubai, where you can imagine the tallest tower in the world and then it happens, or you imagine a ski resort in the middle of a desert and it happens, or you imagine an island shaped like a leaf and it happens. It can sometimes seem like these things can happen overnight, but actually building an ecosystem that supports a true fashion industry requires a lot more than fashion shows and media. It requires a real backbone of support. And the same conversations that I have in other parts of the world is that, that ecosystem, I liken it to a technology ecosystem. So if you think about the ecosystem in Silicon Valley that supports the growth of the startups that are changing, the way we live, a fashion ecosystem is similar. You need the right education, you need, the right media, you need the right, production and sampling facilities, you need the right government support, you need the right media support, and you need that connectivity with the rest of the world. And I think, Dubai seems to be taking some steps in the right direction, but I think, it remains to be seen how that develops. And, I hope to come back on future visits to experience that and see that. But just be aware, there's a long way to go before I think any city in the world can claim to be a fashion capital on the same scale as the established cities.
Well, I wouldn't take it to compete with London, Paris, New York, or Milan as a fashion capital, but taking the purchasing power of this region within the business of fashion, I think maybe more credit should be given to the region and to some of its influencers.
No, absolutely. However, fashion is one of those industries that doesn't just run on dollars. And it's not just about your ability to throw money at a solution, at a problem. Fashion. At its heart, fashion is a creative industry. And in order for any fashion ecosystem to thrive, it needs to support, nourish, nurture, and endeavor to create and support real creativity. And creativity is the lifeblood of fashion. Without creativity, there is no business of fashion. By the same token, without business, there is no creativity, doesn't have a purpose in fashion. So the two have to work together. This is why our mantra at BOF is that fashion is very much a left brain and right brain business. It goes back to those original insights that I had many years ago, that you really need both. And so in order for this region to thrive, yes, money is important, but creativity cannot be underestimated.
Thank you, Imran. I think, I'm sure we have a few questions in the audience.
Thank you. So this question is also directed to Scott. Basically, I've been hearing you talking about blogging in 2008 and figuring out your business model. So that was yesterday. Today is Instagram, you have Snapchat, you have Periscope, you have a lot of other outlets, and we don't know if this is going to be a valid outlet tomorrow. How ready are you for the next big thing?
Me personally, or our business?
Blogging and technology, in terms of what's happening in technology, and being ready to a platform that might be relevant next year or whatever.
Well, I think you raise a very interesting point, because I think the only constant here really is that we're going to constantly be looking at new things and trying to understand new things. As soon as the industry began to barely understand Twitter and Facebook, there was Instagram. Now that everyone in fashion is on Instagram, people are looking at Periscope and Snapchat. And I think there is a tendency to think about technology as being similar to a fashion trend. That technology is going to be in one season and then gone the next season. But that's not how technology works. Technology, instead of being, this color this season and another color the next season, technology is actually iterating and building on top of things. So if you think about Instagram, what is Instagram really? Instagram is, for me, the culmination of 2 or 3 other technologies that came before it, right? The idea of following people, where did that come from? Twitter. The idea of imagery with filters and all of that. Do you guys remember those early apps where you could, I forget what it was called now already. Pardon? Instamatic, yeah. Hipstamatic. You could create those filters and you could create the images, but you couldn't share them, right? And this idea of thinking about, a social network, where you could connect with people and message people, that that really came through Facebook. So, you know, Instagram in a way is like a genetic recombination of the social media that came before it. And in a way, this is how technology works. So we're going to have to constantly adapt and change. Like the technologies, if you talk to real technology experts about the stuff that's coming down the line, I mean, I was reading an article on the plane on the way over here about Oculus Rift, you know, this company that Facebook has bought. You know, virtual reality apparently is upon us. You know, I know this whole Back to the Future anniversary happened a few days ago, which was, you know, quite interesting. But all that stuff that was in the movies, the stuff that we never imagined was possible, it's happening. So I think we're just at the beginning. And I think having a mindset that is open, willing to experiment, willing to try new things, that's going to be the key to success. Not everything is going to last. Not everything's going to work, but you have to embrace it. And the problem with so many companies and the establishment in the fashion industry is that there's a tendency to instantly reject things just because it's not the way things were always done. We're in the midst of one of the biggest shifts in the history of the world. And this digital technology revolution that we're living in, we're only like 20, 30 years into it. Just wait and see what's going to happen. I mean, I think we're in for an extremely interesting ride.
I'm Maria Piazer, I'm a global fashion developer. I have a question concerning the real business, because you know, I'm from Paris. As you meet the most important executive chief and designer, I would like to have your opinion concerning the future of the business. I mean, for the emerging talent, because when we see there is the luxury and the fast fashion, and to find a place for the new talents and specifically the local market, as you know, to be global, I would like to have your advice as you are a professional of business. Me too, I try. Every day, like you, I fight again with all of the mutation of the market. So I would like to have a very precise analysis of the retail future, because it's very complicated for brands to launch, you know, to develop. So thank you.
Okay. Well, I could be here for an hour answering that question.
Yes, me too.
And I'll do my best to provide a precise analysis. But I think on the one hand, now is an extremely exciting moment for emerging fashion businesses. I think, you know, as you travel the world, as I'm sure many of you do, you know, I know I do, and I'm on, you know, St. Martin's Place in Sydney, Australia, or I'm on, you know, Bloor Street in Toronto, or I'm in, you know, the Pudong district in Shanghai. You know, what you see is the same stuff everywhere. You see the same brands flogging the same products with the same window displays and the same marketing messages all over the world. And in that context, one might think that actually there's no more exciting moment to be launching and creating new businesses, because I think consumers are looking for something special. You know, I was having this conversation with someone over dinner the other night in Rome, and you know, he was a jewelry designer, and he said, you know, well, what do you think? He asked a very similar question to you. He said, what do you think about emerging business? And I said, well, people are thirsting for something different. You know, people, especially the most sophisticated consumers, they want to be able to discover something and have something that nobody else has, right? So on the one hand, I think there's a lot of opportunity. On the other hand, it's never been easier to launch a business. And so there are so many businesses launching, and it's so competitive. And to really create something different that breaks out and stands out in the global marketplace is extremely challenging. We have technology, of course, that can help us reach a global audience. And we have initiatives like, you know, this one here in Dubai and similar ones in other parts of the world that are kind of designed to support and nurture talent. But let me tell you, I think actually, while the consumer is looking for something new, there's way, way too many brands out there. And I think with the output and the pace at which the fashion industry is now operating, I sometimes wonder, is it going to start moving so fast and there's going to be so much stuff that it just all falls apart? And it kind of sounds like a doomsday scenario, and I don't mean to be so negative, because I do think it's an exciting time. I just wonder about how sustainable it is.
So Business of Fashion just wrote an article about Kering's quarterly results. Do you see Business of Fashion going even more business and giving like financial investment advice to platforms like Goldman Sachs or McKinsey, where you guys have the know-how and the color and the bird's eye view of the industry, and you can really like say, okay, this was a bad season, but because of the creative director X and Y, and I would buy this stock, I would sell the stock, etc.
Yeah, I think of our writers on BOF now as a chorus of voices. So I was a choir boy growing up, and you had the sopranos, and you had the altos, and you had the tenors, and then you had the baritones, and then you had the basses. BOF is kind of similar. We will always have different voices. We've initially, a lot of our voice was a business voice, and we've had from the very beginning, business experts in the industry write columns for us or articles for us. Recently we've started publishing a column by a very respected financial analyst from Paribas named Luca Solca, and he publishes regular articles analyzing, Kering and what's going on with Gucci, and what's the problem with Prada, and he provides a real business lens. But then we also have creative voices like Tim Blanks, and I think having the right balance, it's like a choir. You don't want one voice to outshine the other voices, and it's about, for us, keeping the right balance of voices. We won't go too much in one direction or too much in the other direction. Well, I'm kind of now like an orchestra conductor, so I'm like trying to make sure that everyone's speaking or singing rather from the same hymn sheet and playing their instruments, but that we're speaking with a voice that's consistent.
Hi Imran, I'm Seema, and my question to you is that just now you mentioned that creativity and business are eternal, and if you look at the business of fashion, traditionally it's been more creative centric than business centric, and you use terms like analysis and structures, so it's less structured than other businesses traditionally. So how do you see these platforms like BOF and other platforms bring in that structural part to the industry, and the terms like analysis and all become fashion vocabulary also, because these are the terms which bring in structure to the industry?
Sure. I think you raised actually a very interesting point. One of the things I observed as I started working, especially as a consultant in fashion and seeing the inside of how real fashion companies work, you have this like super glossy facade, right? Really famous brands with like these stores that are these temples, and then you go inside the businesses and it was a bit like walking into a time warp. There's a lot of inefficiency in the way fashion businesses are run. There's still so much that's done through like manual spreadsheets and Word documents, and people aren't really using technology to improve and streamline the processes. So one example was when we looked at the recruiting industry in fashion, and so much of the talent in fashion has traditionally been placed either through headhunters, which, as many of you know, is a very expensive way to find talent. They'll charge you up to a third of the first year salary of someone that they place as a fee. And I think when we launched BOF Careers, one of the things we were trying to do was provide an efficient marketplace for talent. So why should we rely on headhunters when on the one hand at BOF we have like what I think is, and maybe this is some view, the most talented, smartest, digital savvy people in the fashion industry coming to BOF every day. Why shouldn't we connect those people with job opportunities at the best fashion companies in the world? And using technology and using our platform, we've managed to connect them. That's just one example. I mean, I think there's countless examples of ways in which we can use technology to provide insight and intelligence for the industry. So, when we talk about the future of BOF, I really see it as a platform, as a technology platform, and we have lots of ideas and things that we'd like to do in the future about, helping to make the interactions and the transactions and the relationships between various parts of our community more efficient. And so that's, I think, how a platform like BOF can help the industry.
Imran.
Yes.
So I've had the pleasure of working with people like Fabian Barron, Carl Templer. My best friends work for John Pfeiffer, Stephen Gann, people that are consistently on the BOF 500. So my question for you is, with the influx of newcomers like Lucky Blue Smith and Anna Avers, at what point do you decide, okay, I can't ignore this person, they have to be on the BOF 500?
That is a good question too.
Thank you.
It's one of the one of the most asked questions is like, how do we come up with that list? And it's not science, but it is based on a lot of data and research. And the first place we turn as we're thinking about additions to the list is we turn to the community of people who are already in the BOF 500. So every spring, they all receive an email from us with a survey link. And we ask them to nominate people. And this year it was amazing. Like, people you saw in that video, Christopher Bailey and Marco Bizzari, they all wrote to us with nominations saying, I think this person is making a significant contribution to the industry, and this is why. And then we get hundreds of nominations. And then we take those nominations and we research the heck out of them. We go and look at what they've been doing. We speak to other people in the industry. We talk to people in different parts of the world. And we slowly but surely kind of call the names. And if the same person's name is coming up from 2 or 3 different people, then we know that there's someone we should really pay attention to.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Hi. So I work in media, and we're heavily seeing the importance of influencers and bloggers. It's been a big shift from what it used to be. Like, brands are working with them more seriously than they did before. And it's also becoming more important for emerging designers as well, that they do heavily rely on influencers to get the word and message out about these new brands. So what's your analysis on this big shift, and also where do you see it moving into?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that shift started about around the time people like Scott, one of the pioneers. I think maybe one of the first fashion blogs I ever saw was Scott's. I think that started about 10 years ago. I see this convergence happening. I don't really think of, if you look at a blog, say like Man Repeller, or you look at a blog like Into the Gloss, they started as blogs, but they've really become media outlets. There's no difference between, in terms of the way that people consume this stuff. They're reading it on their phone, and whether it's Vogue or it's, Man Repeller or it's BOF, these are all different voices. And I think, you can see the way Vogue.com has developed their online presence. That's because you have to be a digital influencer now. You have to have a digital presence now. And then you see how online companies like BOF or Hypebeast have created print editions. I think many of these digital influencers are not really just digital influencers, they're industry influencers. And we don't really differentiate them. Within the BOF 500, actually, we just put all of those people together. So Anna Wintour is right next to Susie Bubble on our list. I mean, we see them as being peers. And maybe that's by virtue of the fact of how BOF came about, because I don't see there being a big difference anymore. I think in order to stand out in a very crowded media landscape, you have to have something unique to say, you have to have big reach, and you have to be, creative about how you do it. And you really have to understand technology. So yes, it's true that brands are having to grapple with a whole set of new names and faces, but if you ask me, it's about time. I mean, I think, if these new influencers are adding new voices and points of view to the industry, then that's only a good thing.
Hello,
Hi.
Sinta Magazine from Sinta Qatar from Here Magazine. As a journalist, I'm curious to know how do you prepare the editorial calendar and content of the website on a daily basis, and what are the most popular articles on the site?
Okay. So there was a time when, of course, I wrote all the words, and then I cropped all the photos, and then I inputted them, and then I uploaded them, and then I waited to see what would happen. Luckily, I have a whole amazing team of people to help me with that now, and my involvement in editorial is really, I have a philosophy: if there's garbage in, you get garbage out, right? So I get very involved in the early stages of decision making around what content we're going to focus on. We have a weekly editorial meeting every Monday in the afternoon. Our writers come to us with very structured pitches that fit a McKinsey framework that I learned when I was a consultant. It's called situation, complication, resolution, and all of our articles are developed with this idea that you need tension in articles. There needs to be a really clear context provided, and we need to provide some kind of insight to our readers. So once something gets through that filter and that kind of debate that we have as a team, then things really work like clockwork. We use a lot of productivity tools, technology tools like Trello and Slack, and those things help us to organize. We have to adapt in real time. On Thursday night, just as I was about to go to a dinner in Rome, the news of Raf Simons' exit from Dior was breaking. So I'm trying to communicate with my team on Slack about how we're going to work on the news, and we use all of these tools to make sure that we're communicating in real time. The other really important thing we do to shape our editorial is to listen to the feedback from our community. Our comments section is a very active place. We also get a lot of feedback on Twitter and on Facebook, and I'm constantly looking at that feedback to understand what the community is saying, listening to their questions, and understanding what people are interested in. Because of course, if people are interested in certain topics, then I try to find ways of integrating that into our editorial plan. And then in terms of the most popular articles on the site, in August, we launched the section that Susan was talking about, BOF education. And from the very beginning, the first set of articles that really kind of caught on was this set of articles called The Business of Fashion Basics, which was a series of articles that I started writing in 2007. And it was basically how to set up a fashion business from scratch. And I was sitting next to one young designer yesterday at dinner, Nafsika, who told me that she discovered those articles back in 2007, and those are still, even today, 8 years later, those are still the most popular articles on BOF. It's articles that educate young designers about how to set up a fashion business. And so we decided, based on that learning, to create a whole new section on the site, which is really about education. And students and young people are the most active, the most passionate followers of BOF. So that whole education section is really dedicated to them.
Well, before wrapping up, I'd like to just going back to one of the questions on the floor about setting up, the business challenges and what you just mentioned of giving guidance to young designers. What about maybe setting up a sort of a Q&A consultancy online for young designers, for young entrepreneurs, to send direct, pointed questions to you? Would you have the time to answer that and consider that?
Actually, I feel like we already do that. Because like I said, all of the questions that get posted on Facebook, the emails we receive, the comments, and I'm constantly looking at those, and I'm constantly reacting to them. I did a live Q&A on this platform called Reddit about 1.5 years ago, and I don't know, do any of you use Reddit? So they have this thing called Ask Me Anything, and it's called a Reddit AMA. So I did a Reddit AMA, and we had like hundreds of people asking me questions in real time, and I was answering them, and it was really exciting. And actually, now that you mention it, maybe I should do another one of those. So,
good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for being with us today and to come
Thank
to
you.
Dubai and to Fashion Forward.